Welcome, everyone. I'm Cheryl Cage. I'm a Senior Security Partner Strategist with AWS, and I am on the Security and Compliance Partner team. And today I want to introduce you to two of our partners that we're going to be talking about SOC 2 compliance. I want to introduce Duplo Cloud and Align. I'm happy to have you join us today for a great talk. And we're happy to have you show everyone, the great things that you're doing around security, automation, and acceleration. We did discuss scoping a little bit. So what are some tools that can help that customer though? Is it, making sure that they have architecture, reference architectures? Is it data flow diagrams, asset inventory? What kind of tools do they need to help you figure out what their scope is?
Yeah, I think if we go back to the people, process, and technology, that really is what it's anchored in, and it's in and around that service that they're certifying.
So there's a number of tools and things that we can do, and we should share with our clients to help them. So one of our main, essentially our main product when it comes to managing and running these audits is our proprietary in-house tool that we call Ascend, which is basically a project management tool where both the client and we have access to it. And that's kind of where the project lives, if you will. So all the requests, all the things that we're going to need to complete the project are going to basically flow through that portal. So that's kind of the starting point. And the client can come in there and say, okay, hey, here's the general list of requests. Here, get a feel for kind of what the asks are going to be and how much heavy lifting is going to be required. And then from there, obviously, we have a number of policies, procedures, template documents, that sort of thing that we can share with the client, especially if they're in the more immature, shall we say, cycle of the audit, and they're just coming to us for the first time. There's a lot of, you mentioned network diagrams, security policies and procedures, all those kinds of things. We can kind of guide the client to help them get up to speed on what they need to. And then from there, the idea is that going forward, things will mature, things will get built out, over time. So it's kind of just a starting point, and then we go from there.
Connor does bring up a good point. SOC 2 is very documentation heavy, so you need to have all those policies and procedures in place. How does Duplo Cloud help with that?
Yeah, I think what we tend to do is that we are more on the implementation side. So our general goal is that if the customer is using Duplo Cloud, as far as the AWS controls are concerned, by and large, they don't have to worry about it, period. Our goal is that when the readiness assessment happens, they come in, they're there like 90% of the time, for example, right? But at the same time, it's not something that they really need to worry about underneath it, and then they're just using it. Then comes the policy aspect of it. So as far as the AWS infrastructure policies are concerned, that I think we would give them controls, and then they would have we could help them with the template policies and stuff, but that's typically when they actually talk to Align and so forth is when they nail down their policies. But what we have done beforehand is that we've already set in the best practices and sort of gotten them like 90% there in terms of implementation, as far as AWS is concerned.
And we're talking kind of, I want to get into the automation aspect of, SOC 2 and, how does Duplo Cloud help automate that process? Someone comes to you and says, I need to get, SOC 2 type 1, tomorrow. Right. How do you make that happen?
Yeah, so I think when somebody says like that, so the first question we ask them is that like, okay, what do you have? How big is your infrastructure? And when you set up that infrastructure, did you have SOC 2 in mind? Did you put in those controls, right? So now let's say the answer is, I have a huge infrastructure, hundreds of virtual machines and workloads and containers. I didn't think about SOC 2, right? Then we're like, oops, okay, we need to figure out like how to do that. But on the other hand, if they basically say that, okay, I have a rather small infrastructure, that what we could do is that, okay, you go and install the software that automatically pushes much of the SOC 2 controls. And you could basically split SOC 2 controls into two pieces: provisioning time controls and post-provisioning controls. Post-provisioning controls are monitoring controls, okay? If security group goes off, or the CPUs and the memory and those kind of things. Those are easy to basically apply, right? Regardless of whether you have an infrastructure or not, we basically go and enable it, and then it'll start monitoring the system and let you. But those constitute, I would say from my experience, about 30 to 40% of the overall control set. But 60% is actually provisioning time. Like you say, right? I mean, you want to prevent a disease, not cure a disease. So our focus is to see how they can be SOC 2 compliance at the get-go. So timing is really important, right? So if they are talking to us at the right time, we can make sure that SOC 2 is something out of box and they don't have to worry about, and all the automation is there. Like we'll get them 95%. But if they are talking to us at a much later time in the journey, we probably can get them 40% there right away with a few button clicks, and then we have to work with them and figure out like how to do things in a non-disruptive way.
And so Duplo Cloud, it's DevSecOps platform.
Right.
So how much, time and money can the average, company save by not having to hire all those people to do that work?
Right. What we have typically seen is about like 4 to 5 weeks their infrastructure. I mean, if we talk to them at the right time, the infrastructure would be compliant, right? And I would say that a lot of our customers who are, let's say, less than 50 VMs or maybe 75 VMs, they may not have an in-house DevOps engineer. The larger ones do have, but it's an order of magnitude. Basically, like what I have seen in the industry is that if you're talking about like 60 controls, 2 controls like 2-3 days of control, and they're taking a long time, like basically like months. With Duplo Cloud, I think it's maybe about like 4 to 6 weeks is what I would say, to get to that stage where they're 95% there. And again, I'm talking about the cloud infrastructure. There's a lot that happens outside of that, right? I mean, the endpoint security and the processes, that part takes some time, but with Duplo Cloud, I think the AWS part is sort of like given. It's there.
And, we're talking about automation too. And, in the past, auditing has been a very manual process. And we're starting to see more automation built in, in the auditing process. So I know you talked about Ascend. Can you tell us about how Ascend, automates that process?
Yeah, so in and around Ascend, there are some areas where we're automating kind of on the back end. So if you think about the evidence that needs to be collected in order to assert that these controls are in place, we allow our customers to basically upload that evidence, and then we do things like deduplication. So it's this concept of test once, use many, where you can actually look at one piece of evidence and maybe map it to multiple controls. So this is really to cut down on the number of times we might request an information security policy or an AWS configuration setting. So that's one of the pieces that we do that. Another area where we're focused is in and around collection of the evidence. So since that information now resides behind APIs, which we can programmatically hit and query, we're able to actually go and get access to those APIs and pull back that information. So what we're really focused in and around are the biggest time savers. Where did engineers used to have to go and take screenshots and do that for hours, maybe even days, to collect, let's say, their access control list from AWS? So can we actually just go hit the same APIs, pull back the security groups, pull it into a document that can be used both by the engineers and the auditors to review, and then associate it to the control in order to say, all right, this is how I'm going to perform my control testing. So within Align and Ascend, those are the patterns that we're working on and getting them implemented.
Wonderful. And for SOC 2, do you do any sort of sampling for evidence? Does that come into play as well?
Sampling does come into play. I mean, I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier about scoping and making sure that you have the proper scope. Where we focus in and around scope is really at the account level right now. So in AWS, we can have multiple accounts. So for your service, if you're really just focused on your production environment, then we would focus on that account. You may have multiple accounts that actually support that service. So scoping comes into play, making sure that we have that defined for every assessment that we would be focused on. And we're doing that within Ascend, and then we'll continue to improve upon our scoping ability over time with the product.
And we're talking about automation, but I know what parts of auditing are still manual. There's still some manual pieces to it, so maybe you can let us know what those are.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, auditing, there's quite a bit of human in the loop automation going on right now, and we're starting to improve upon that. You'll still find yourself manually uploading documentation. I know we were talking about Duplo Cloud and really, in and around the areas of AWS infrastructure and what's there, but there are other areas within SOC 2 that fall outside of the infrastructure, quite a few. So, things like organizational charts, background checks, those things might be a manual upload. So that does occur. Going through and actually assessing and reviewing it, there's a lot of work that's going on in and around the concept of configuration compliance, right? Or really looking at a setting and then making a determination. But there's still a human component to that, to look at those reports, make sure that over time that control is operating effectively, and then adding that to it as well. So there's still a considerable amount of manual tasks that do occur. but we're moving towards automation wherever possible.
Yeah, that's great. And since we're talking about, we kind of mentioned continuous compliance or continuous monitoring, how does Duplo Cloud, provide continuous monitoring?
Yeah, I think one of the core pieces is that, in fact, like in our business model, we almost don't charge them till they get to a point where they have most of the controls in place, at least the initial provisioning time controls. The idea is that in today's world, with microservices and so many different AWS services and whatnot, there is a constant change in the system. So it's important to have automation, not just for constant provisioning, but also to make sure that as people are provisioning constantly, they're not breaking anything. So Duplo Cloud does it in two ways. One is that Duplo Cloud is a provisioning tool. So you actually use it to provision and make changes on an ongoing basis. So that way you're guaranteed that it's not one time. As you go forward, you would continue to be compliant because you continue to use that tool. And then, of course, there is what we do is that we tend to orchestrate independent third-party softwares, which in this case is AWS Security Hub, like AWS Config, OSSEC, and so on, and provision them and check whether the system is in compliance or not. So that way, I think we try to get not have our custom code to do monitoring, so that way we can keep ourselves honest. So do the provisioning, orchestrate third-party tools, and then make sure things are in alignment and compliance. And if not, just make an alert and then let people know.
And SOC 2 is not a one and done, right? It's an annual thing. And one question I did forget to mention, I asked earlier, is what's the normal reporting timeline that you see?
There's kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end when we think about a SOC 2 project. Typically the beginning, planning stage, kind of the ramp up. So depending on the client's readiness, depending on, if they've done an audit in the past, we'll kind of gauge how much ramp up time they're going to need. Typically it's about 6 to 8 weeks on the front end, where we deliver that information request list, is what we call it, in the Ascend platform that we were talking about earlier. And the client will have an opportunity to review that, start drafting their responses, start uploading evidence, all the things that we've been talking about. And like I said, usually that's anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks of kind of prep time. Then we'll kind of get to the middle, which is what we call the field work, which is essentially when we have our dedicated meetings with the client. We'll have our what we call control walkthrough meetings, where we'll essentially go through each one of the SOC 2 criteria and say, what are the controls here that are applicable, talk through that, make sure that everything is mapped appropriately. And then once we kind of get through that stage and get everything the way we need it and get on the same page with the client, then we kind of go to the end or the wrap-up stage, which is typically the part where there's a number of internal processes that we have on our side, where it's QA review, and we have a reporting team that drafts up the report, and there's a little bit of back and forth internally. Usually that's about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on, again, the scope of the project, how long the report is. There's a number of factors that kind of play into that, but typically it's that last part is about 4 to 6 weeks there.
And then for SOC 2 Type 2, they have to, have those controls in place and running effectively.
Right.
So what is that usually? That testing timeline, is it 3 months? Is it 12 months?
Yeah, great question. So again, it really depends. Typically, the shortest assessment that we'll do for a Type 2 is 3 months. And then we kind of like to work in quarterly intervals, anywhere from 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. We can accommodate just depending on what makes sense for the client. And then usually what we like to do is work our way up to that 12-month annual cycle. And then going forward on a continuous basis, we'll come in once a year, and then basically just review the controls and the evidence that has been accumulating for the last 12 months or so.
And with continuous compliance platforms and things like that, does that make that easier to audit coming in the next year? So if you can see that they've been compliant with this control for the past 12 months.
Yes, yeah, it makes a world of difference. I mean, it really does, because when I think back, when I first started, we were still managing and tracking a lot of things through spreadsheets, and it was manual and it was offline, and it wasn't, it was just very messy and not efficient. So when I think about how far we've come, even in just my short time in the compliance world, it's pretty amazing, because I don't know how we would operate without the framework that we have now. I can't imagine going back to the way that we used to do things, because it really does. It keeps everything centralized, both for us as the auditors and then, of course, our clients as well. Because, our clients, obviously, I think they love working with us. At least they tell us they do. But of
Keep
course,
you at a distance.
yeah, of course they have their other jobs and responsibilities that they go back to throughout the year. So then when we come back next year for the audit, it's always good for them to have that refresher. They can just pop back into the Ascend portal, say, okay, what did I provide last year? Oh, that's what this was, and that sort of thing. So it's really helps on both sides to kind of keep everything centralized and together.
Yeah, that's wonderful. What are some of the common risks and pitfalls you see as someone's starting out their SOC 2 journey?
So I think that, when we talk about SOC 2 being painful, I think that's sort of synonymous terms there. So what we try to like to do is really help our clients with the understanding piece. And I can certainly let these other gentlemen here speak to some of the other, when we go back to that people process technology thing, right? So I think about, a lot of our clients come to us and they just don't know where to start, right? They just don't understand the SOC 2 criteria. They don't understand the guidance. They don't know what they're going to need to do to get everything in place. So at Align, a lot of our marketing materials, we have the mountain theme going. So we always like to say that we're the Sherpas, kind of helping our clients up the mountain, so to speak. So, I think one of those things that, again, from my perspective, is just getting them familiar with what we're going to be doing and letting them know that, hey, we've done this before, we've seen it 100 times, we're going to get to the top of the mountain, so to speak. But we just got to make sure that we get all the right controls in place.
Yeah, I think what I've largely seen is that a lot of organizations start off and do a lot of infrastructure setup without things in mind, especially security. So what I would basically say is that if you have a business and you don't have to be SOC 2 compliant on that day or even requiring it, but if you anticipate to be in a regulated industry, expect things like SOC 2 to be required. So make sure that when you do things, try to do things right from the beginning, because it's a lot harder technically to actually go and patch things later. And there are many examples. If you have to change like machines from one VPC to another VPCs and things like that, it's a lot harder. Change things which are not encrypted. I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, like you have to redo the whole thing and whatnot, and that's just the nature of things. So
yeah, then they
keep that
incur that cost, right? There's more cost to that when you have to re-engineer and do all those things.
It's disruption, and it's like so many things, right? The time that you have saved, probably initially you probably lose all of it at a much more critical time of your journey in the company.
When someone is wanting to go through SOC 2, how soon should they enlist an auditor? When should they contact you during that process?
I think this goes back to what we were just talking about, to prevent the rework and this concept of backfilling security. It's better to engage earlier, right? Because we can help during that discovery process of really figuring out what are your requirements. From an independence perspective, and Connor can talk about this as well, on the implementation side, we have to stay out of that. So we can give guidance, we can give assistance from that perspective, but we can't be an implementer of any of those controls or the infrastructure. It's good to get some additional guidance as you're going through your audit prep, as you're going through your readiness, as you're going through your build out, and we're able to assist from that perspective. So earlier is going to be better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only thing I want to add there, just to not to beat a dead horse, but I think coming to us before you need the Type 2 SOC 2 report by tomorrow is always
Right.
a good thing. So really reaching out to us before it's an emergency, so that way we have time to evaluate what you've got going on. And as I mentioned before, the sort of the beginning, middle, and end of the cycle, there's going to be some ramp up time, especially if you're new to it. So I think just trying to get in contact with us as early as possible is going to be great.
And same with you. You were just saying, maybe a greenfield environment, right? Or one that they haven't.
Sooner.
Yes.
Yeah, the sooner basically.
And last question I have. Do you see that you're doing a lot of migrations to AWS?
Right,
I mean,
right.
yes.
Yeah, I think migrations. So the thing is that migrations, in that sense, in the context of SOC 2 and compliance, and our work is much easier, because migration is almost always greenfield. Mm-hmm. So using the Duplo Cloud software, they can focus on the app migration versus dealing with the compliance and security of the infrastructure. So the idea is that use Duplo Cloud to do all the provisioning and migration. This is one thing less that you have to worry about. And like you said, as far as compliance is concerned, you'll be there 95%. Mm-hmm. And then just focus on the app, the migration, the downtime, the data, and stuff like that. And that's where like the provisioning aspect of the system sort of comes in.
So Venkat, do you normally see, are you seeing a lot of migrations to AWS as they're starting out their SOC 2 journey, or are they already built in the cloud?
No, I think it's both, right? I mean, obviously, a lot of the infrastructure still exists outside of the public cloud, so it's both. But I think implementation-wise, I would basically say if it's a migration, then SOC 2 and compliance is something that they have to worry about less because they're starting the journey in the beginning with us, and these things are done out of box using the Duplo Cloud software, and they can purely focus on their application and stuff. But on the other hand, if they're already operating in the infrastructure, that's fine too. In fact, I would basically say 70% we deal with people who are already there, and 30% could be migrations. And yeah, I think it all depends on how much non-compliant work is sort of being done. And that's where the challenges are to sort of go and fix it.
Oh, that's great information there. And I want to thank you all for joining us today and providing some great insight and information about SOC 2 compliance on AWS. And look forward to doing some more things in the future.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
Thank you.